Welcome. We're very excited today to have with us Secretary Dan Glickman. Is Secretary the right
You can call me whatever you want to,
title?
but that was my last title.
Our next guest has so many titles that I was thinking we could do the whole 25-minute show just running through his resume. But the neat part about it is that our guest today, and I'm going to use a word that I think is okay with you, because I've been trying to think of the right way to introduce you. He is a true statesman of the political system. He has been part of the political system for 40 years. He's worn more hats in the political system than I think many people could ever think of. And because of that, I believe he has a unique prism with which to look back at the political system. And as you know, on our show, we always talk about solutions. Dan right now is working with a group, the Bipartisan Policy Institute, that's very focused on solutions. So we don't always want to talk about just the problems here. We always want to talk about the solutions. So if I can embarrass Dan for just a few moments, I want to talk about his political history, and then we'll get with the interview. When I looked him up on Wikipedia, I was actually surprised to see he had been a school board president. I think if you scratch a successful politician somewhere in our system, you find they've been a school board president. So he was the school board president in Wichita, Kansas. Later elected to Congress, where he served 18 years and had a stellar career in Congress, so stellar that President Clinton then anointed him to be the Secretary of Agriculture, which is why I defer to Secretary as the lead title here. And then Dan moved to the dark side, which of course, as you know, is where I do my professional work as a lobbyist. He moved over to the dark side with the Motion Picture Association, it's called?
Motion Picture Association of America.
Of America.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he escaped the dark side and he moved over to this bright new world of policy development with the Bipartisan Policy Institute. So what we're going to do a bit is, as I said, Dan help us look at how he sees the world through this prism, and then we'll drill down and talk about some of these solution sets offered through the Bipartisan Policy. So welcome, statesman, secretary, congressman, school board president Glickman.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here. I'll take all of them, you know.
Did you ever envision, going back 40-some years, that you would spend this much of your life solving problems and being involved in the system?
Who knew? I mean, coming from Wichita, things kind of evolved, whatever it was. But I've had a good career, and I hope it's not over yet. But I'm not going to ever run for office again, but I hope it's not over yet.
Well, I've anointed you statesman, which to me is an impressive title, and I'll tell you why.
That's good title.
I don't think we have many statesmen in our system today. And before the show, we were talking about this book that I've sitting on the table over there, The Last Great Senate. And on the cover of the book, the author refers to statesmanship as one of the things that were, important in that time. They're always important. But you had started your congressional career back then. It was the Carter era. And he is suggesting that we had many statesmen in the Senate then. Is that your recollection of the system when you got into it, that it had the statesmen and problem solvers?
Well, I would say there were more problem solvers. The system has always worked tough. You know, our system of government was set up to have one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator at all times anyway. A lot of people don't realize that. We have separation of powers, so the Congress and the President are separate but equal. Then the Founding Fathers worried about the Congress. They thought it was going to be tyrannical, so they separated it into two branches. And so everything within our system was made to be tough. And so at the best, it's slow. The process is slow, intentionally slow, in order to keep us from doing wild and crazy things. But back then, 30 or 40 years ago, I think you had more problem solvers, people to get things done. And the country economically was more optimistic. So I think people were willing to give the benefit of their doubt to their government more than we do now. But I'd say now it is tougher. We're in a much greater state of gridlock. We have much more difficulty getting just the simple things done. We can't even pass a transportation bill to fund our highway system. I mean, that ought to be slam dunk, to be honest with you.
And you were at agriculture. We just had a difficult time getting the ag bill done, right?
It took 3 years to get a farm bill done, and years past that really never happened. So I do think there are a lot of reasons for that. And I think money in politics, 24-hour media, I think the bifurcation of the public. I mean, part of this is the public's a lot more polarized than they ever were before. And feelings are stronger on one side versus the other. And we have a much more tribalized politics than we did before. People were more willing to get together and work on common projects. So when the book talks about statesmen of the Senate, yeah, even in my own state, I'm from Kansas, Bob Dole I'd consider a statesman. He was partisan, but he was a statesman. The last analysis, he wanted to get things done. That's why we were sent to Washington. He had served in the military, wounded in World War II, came back like so many of these, quote, statesmen did, and they wanted to make the country a better place. And in fact, if you look at those statesmen, so many of them had served in the military during World War II or during the Korean War. And you wonder whether that military service was a key factor in making them statesmen.
I've thought about that. Was there an aspect of having served in the military, whether it's the discipline of the military, or even more important to me, the fact that military, I think, helps create leadership skills? Have we lost some of that? I mean, we don't want to go to war just to create leaders, but...
No. I think that those two things you talked about, plus the camaraderie, plus you have to take care of your buddies, and, just this kind of sense of belonging to something bigger. When people look back, most people who served in the military will tell you, well, they really didn't like it very much, but they felt like they were all in it together. And there are a lot of ways to serve the country. It can be a non-military service as well, the Peace Corps, the AmeriCorps, faith-based communities, and this kind of thing. And one of the things this Bipartisan Policy Commission that I'm working on is recommending is we, in fact, go to a year of service for all Americans between the ages of 18 and 28. And they get something out of it. They get some benefits out of it, so it's not just totally voluntary. But we've lost this kind of sense of community in America where everybody's in it together. So in some sense, the public's not pushing the politicians very sensibly because the public themselves doesn't quite know where the politics ought to be going.
So your career started with this period where Mr. Shapiro's saying was the last great Senate, and you were there for 18 years. Did you sense like a gradual slipping of this relationship of the brake and the pedal? I mean, how did you sense things were moving along in your career in terms of...
Remember, I was elected by, I defeated an incumbent congressman, and I lost in 1994 by losing my seat. So you live by the sword, you die by the sword, so to speak. But it got a lot tougher towards the end. The money in politics began to grow arithmetically. So when I first ran, I spent $100,000 on my congressional race. The last time I ran, I spent about $700,000. Today, that seat would cost about $3.5 million. So I didn't spend all my time raising money. Today, that's a lot of what they do is half their time is spent not listening to floor debate, not working on issues, but call time to donors. That's changed. The media has changed. The media is much more divisive now. And also the American public watches and listens to those things that reinforce their own views. So you find very few liberals watching Fox News, and you find very few conservatives watching MSNBC News or their variations thereof. We are a much more divided society in terms of what we listen to, what we watch, and a lot of that media is just destructive. It's negative. It's not uplifting and positive. Now, in the past, we've had really good, strong leaders that have been able to pull us all together, and it's so difficult now. I mean, you look at President Obama, who I think he tries. I think his heart's in the right place. He's had great difficulty motivating the Congress, moving them along, and even motivating the American people moving along. It's not all his fault. A lot of it is these other changes that I talked about. But we have no alternative. It's still the best system in the world. We got to try to make it function better. We can't be a nation in gridlock constantly on every issue. It doesn't mean people have to give up their personal beliefs. There's nothing wrong with having strong personal beliefs. But it also means you have to have an open mind because sometimes you may be wrong. It happens. It's happened to me. It's unbelievable. But so these are things that hopefully with our involvement in this stuff, we can try to position the country in a better shape over the next few years.
How do you think we got to the point? Again, I'm going to go back to this book. They solved the Panama Canal crisis. They worked on a SALT treaty. They did an energy policy. And, Howard Baker crossed over to help get the Panama Canal thing done. How have we lost the ability to solve problems?
Problems are more difficult now. We've been burned. I think the Vietnam experience, now we have the Afghanistan, Iraq experience, but it's caused the public to be much more distrustful of their leaders. So right now, Congress has an approval rate of 9%. I've been trying to find that 9%. I can't find them anywhere. They must be the relatives of the members. But
they didn't answer the phone when they were called that day.
So all of our institutions, but that's true with banks, lawyers, almost everybody else in society. So there's this great distrust of our system, especially of big institutions. And that certainly impacts the public's belief that Congress and the government can do anything for them. And it discourages leadership. So back in the old days, so to speak, you had leaders that were willing to do courageous things. Howard Baker, Republican senator, was the responsible party to move President Carter's Panama Canal implementation. I can't imagine that happening very much today. There wasn't one Republican that voted for President Obama's Affordable Care Act. Well, I'm not sure the issues are exactly the same way, but you can't have big issues be so partisan. Back then, there was some bipartisanship on these major issues. And any major piece of legislation has to be bipartisan. Otherwise, it's doomed to failure. And that's what we've seen. I think the Affordable Care Act is actually working better now than before. But it's a shame on that big, giant piece of legislation. It became so partisan. So it's now called Obamacare.
Right. And one of the issues we talked about in another show is the immigration issue. I think if you ask people, they would all say we have to solve the immigration problem, no matter how you define it. Yet we've now spent 10 or 12 years not solving it. So how do we find someone to step up, maybe in both parties, and have that kind of collegiality and form the bond that you need to solve that problem?
Well, and what's happened is when you have people have staked out a position, they move out a little bit on the courageous side, they just get killed from home. Particularly on the right, they get killed from there's some on the left as well, but certainly certain people on the Republican side just said no to any immigration reform. That's curious. I've been involved in agriculture, and agriculture and agribusiness is very pro-immigration reform because of the number of seasonal workers that come over and work the farms during various times of the year. But that doesn't seem to be working very well. The business community is actually strongly in favor of immigration reform. But, you know, we live in a period of job inequality, anxiety about the future of the economy, and that gets whipped up, and so it's been very, very difficult. It's been hard for President Obama to lead on this issue. We know that he's for it, but for whatever reason, he hasn't been persuasive at trying to build public support in the country for this. And so now you have all these issues, all these kids coming over. We don't know what to do with them, you know, when they cross the borders. And we have agriculture that's been impacted by not having enough workers in there. This is a serious problem. We've got to solve it.
That's what I'm saying. These are very serious problems, but we keep not solving them. So somewhere along the line, the group you're affiliated with, I don't know when it got together, maybe you could walk us through this, decided to create this Bipartisan Policy Institute. And I assume one of the goals is to create partisanship in problem solving.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Once you leave office, you get more responsible. So
you become a statesman.
Yeah, a statesman. So it's not just me. The people who are involved in this are Senator Daschle, Senator Trent Lott,
right,
the Republican leader, Olympia Snowe, Republican senator from Maine who quit, George Mitchell, other people formed a group to try to see if we could make our political system work better.
And when did they start this?
They started about 5 years ago.
5 years ago,
and
okay.
we deal with a lot of issues, energy, housing. But
was there one thing that caused them all of a sudden to say, hey, guys, we got to get together?
I think it was just the frustration that there wasn't an institution in Washington pushing bipartisanship. There were plenty of institutions pushing partisanship.
Right.
So we decided to focus. This started before I got there, but I've been a part of this effort to try to focus on solutions to the gridlock we're in. And so we just came out with a report. The website is bipartisanpolicy.org. Okay. So if people want to look it up, they can see this website. And we call it Commission for Political Reform, CPR. So just to kind of put a coinage on words. And so we make recommendations in 3 areas. One is congressional reform, how to make Congress work better, reduce the amount of filibusters, have regular order in terms of how bills are being considered, and a variety of congressional things there. Then we have a section on
political. In fact, I'm thinking back to this book again.
Yeah.
They had a major debate, and again, the Republicans got together with the Democrats to deal with the filibuster issue back in whatever it was, 79 or 78 or something, because they knew it was an impediment to solving problems.
And now both parties use it to their advantage to stop things. It's the second thing we look on is political reform, election reform. We're trying to figure out how to make primaries more open and how to get more people voting in primaries, because our congressional districts have become so homogeneous that most districts are automatically Republican or automatically Democrat. And then what tends to happen is the extremes in both parties will dominate those elections. We talk about independent congressional redistricting processes. In our country now, it's the congressmen who choose the people rather than people who choose the congressman. So
you can't imagine how many people have used that same line on this show, but shows you how big of a problem it is.
That's right.
The redistricting.
So, redistricting, you know, is a big problem, and early voting, doing things to encourage more people to vote, and then the final thing we talk about is public service. Some of this is the fault of, not the fault of the people, but the culture of the people. I talked about Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, and all the people who served in the military, but we have very few people who spent much time in public service, not just military service. And yet we have a great demand. Peace Corps has great demand. That we fill about 10% of the slots there, 15% of the slots in other places. And so I think if we could develop a cadre of folks who have been involved in some form of public service in their lives, it creates a bonding experience and it makes them appreciate the country more. And what we find in our studies is people who do public service are more likely to want to go into politics. But right now, most people think politics is a profession that is either corrupt or you run into a brick wall that you can't get anything done. So more true on the federal level than on the state and local level. People still have more confidence in their towns, their mayors, governors than they do in Uncle Sam.
So the bipartisan policy, is that primarily focused on a Washington solution set,
well,
or do you reach out beyond Washington?
We're going to reach, so we've created something called the Citizens for Political Reform, and that's to try to establish a national movement of people who believe that there are opportunities for bipartisanship, that the government can do certain things, and to create people, a cadre of people around the country that can go to town hall meetings of their congressmen or at least work the political system in a constructive way. In some sense, what we're trying to do is to establish an engaged radical middle. There was an agriculture commissioner of Texas, his name was Jim Hightower, years ago, said the only thing in the middle of the road is a yellow stripe and a dead armadillo. And I used to say, yeah, and me, and most people in this country who don't fit the left or the right. And, and so our goal is to see if we can develop this as a culture that you can solve problems, and encouraging people to come into the system to solve problems, and a disincentive to those members of Congress who don't want to solve problems. Right now, they don't find much pushback at home.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah, but how do you message on that? At what level do you get this message out, and how do you get it out?
It's very difficult. So because a bunch of old retiring politicians say we all ought to just love each other and work together. I mean, I wish that would work, but it's hard work. You've got to go out and at university level particularly. So we're going to relationships with institutes of politics and public policy schools all over the country, all the way from, let's say, the Bush School, the University of Texas, to Lyndon Johnson, the Kennedy School, and national libraries, the Reagan Library, other Kennedy Library, other kinds of things. And then, so that's certainly one thing. Legislatively, we need to show the Congress that there are people at home who care about these issues. So that's why this Citizens for Political Reform is being built to try to, develop that kind of thing. I wish we could go further. I believe that the metastasis of money in politics is one of the big factors why the system doesn't work very well, because that money is used to buy ads that try to destroy their opponents.
Right.
You don't see very many ads that aren't what I call destructive ads. And it wasn't as bad when you didn't have billions of dollars doing that. I mean, back in my day, we had some negative ads, but they weren't running for 2 straight years. But now it's just the volume of money coming from every place you can think of, left and right, and Koch brothers, who happens in my hometown in Wichita, to people on the left doing the same thing. I mean, everybody's in this game. And one of my great frustrations in life is our inability to address those issues.
And we spent some time on the show talking about it, but if anything, the Supreme Court just keeps taking us further and further away from where you want to be.
Yeah, and we're not going to probably get a constitutional amendment. Now, if the court were to change, maybe the court would review those earlier decisions on Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision and other things. But it's very tough with the courts. They basically opened the door. They said money is speech and corporations are people. So given that, it's hard to fight that except to be competitive.
I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm going to have a guest on a show, on a future show, there is an effort right now to pass a constitutional amendment to undo Citizens United. There's a group working on it. They're going around to the states. I didn't know this route for constitutional amendment. If you have enough states pass a resolution, you then can force a constitutional convention on an issue.
I've actually talked to those people.
You have, okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, and I wish them well in their effort. I think we're probably ultimately going to end up having to do some things non-constitutional. One thing that is helpful is modern technologies, social networking, handheld devices gives average people more power into the system. So recently you saw the Majority Leader Eric Cantor was beaten in his own primary by a guy who spent 1/37th of what Eric Cantor spent, mostly doing grassroots campaigning and using social media. So maybe the modern world is going to make it easier to kind of challenge the system without having to do nothing but raise millions and millions and millions of dollars. And then Eric Cantor ran mostly negative ads against the guy, and it turned out that when they polled people afterwards, people were so irritated with the negative ads. The more they saw, the more they wanted to vote against him. You know. And then the third thing, of course, was he was a moderate on immigration policy, and his district was very, very conservative, and some people think he was punished because of that.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to the money issue, but within the Bipartisan Policy Institute, you're focusing on the Democracy Project, right?
Yes.
And part of that is to help create leadership skills and things like that. So I think if we created some of those skills, we'd be further down the line. So can you walk us through the Democracy Project?
Yeah, okay. So what we try to do is to bring mayors, governors, former electeds, academics, and corporate leaders together to try to encourage the development of leadership skills, courage, persuasion skills, to give people the comfort and ability to know that they can enter the fray without necessarily the fear that they can't step out of their little narrow area and get their heads cut off. And that's certainly part of the situation. But I would have to say that leadership requires followership. So you got to have people at home that's gonna respond to this kind of stuff. I believe that about 80% of the people are in this vast middle in the country. Got about 10% on the, got about 15% on the real far right, and got about 5% on the real far left. I think there's more people on the far right than there are on the far left, but most of the people are generally center left, or center right. And the big challenge is how to motivate those people to believe that they can have confidence in government, and they can act, and that they can get that message to their elected officials, and then have elected officials with the courage to follow through on them.
Now, you started way back in Wichita, president of the school board. We've had some people on this show, and you're finding people don't even run for the school board anymore. There's school board vacancies. So if you can't get people started at that level, how do you work your way up the food chain to the higher levels?
Well, look, some states, there's a lot of political activism here in Colorado, Oregon. There's some states that are better suited culturally for that kind of thing. But that's why we've got to motivate younger people at an earlier level through some sort of service mentality or ability to build bonds on a common good with the common good. And then in addition to that, we have to figure out a way to improve civics education in America. Ever watch Jaywalking? Remember Jay Leno did it?
I laugh as hard as I can while I'm crying.
While you're crying.
Yes.
Now, I never knew if that was all part of some stage entertainment thing or whether it was true. I suspect it was a bit of both. But it's extraordinary how little people know about not only their country, but how their political systems work and how to influence policy and how to engage. And then they become more susceptible for demagogues. So we're going to try to do our best. There are organizations in America that try to work on this issue of civic education and improve the quality of knowledge of government. And that's another area. It's a long-term prospect, but it's building citizenship. Citizenship is the key of what we need in America for all these things we're talking about.
I don't know about your experience, but I'll travel overseas, and whether I'm talking to a cab driver, they know more about how our government works than our citizens know about how our government works.
The interesting thing is when you travel in Washington, where most of the cab drivers are born overseas, they do know how the government works. In fact, I have my best conversations with Ethiopian cab drivers who've moved to the United States.
It's a way to get some of them to run for office. Is that what you're telling
Get
me?
them on your show, if nothing else.
Well, anyway, time always flies when you're having fun. Tell our viewers again how they can find the Bipartisan Policy and how they can get involved in the Democracy Project. How can they get involved in what you're doing?
Okay, well, anyway, so the Bipartisan Policy Center, the website is www.bipartisanpolicy.org. Through that, you will see portals into the Citizens for Political Reform. It's a way to engage the process. And then you can look at all these recommendations. We made 65 of them. I'd like to hear what people think about them, whether they think they're ridiculous or good or how we can improve upon them.
I'm going to promise you, I'm going to pull those. I'm going to do some segments in the show on those topics to engage our viewers in trying to get educated.
Yeah, well, you're lucky here in Aspen. My guess is you have a lot of engaged people in the political system. You know, it may not be totally representative of the country as a whole, but on the other hand, you know, you can be a leader too.
Well, that's what YouTube's for and the web, and
that's right.
Put the word out there. We'll get it out there.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the only thing that's hard about being a statesman is reducing your message to only 25 minutes, but we appreciate you having done that.
I talk as fast as I can, as you can see.
All the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay.
Hope to have you back
Steve.
sometime.
Okay.